So what do we learn from the mapping on of this psychological journey to this physical journey? One, that it takes a long time. That's emphasized throughout the novel. Also, that it's not direct in any way, that we move forward, then we loop back, then we go to one side. We also learn that events are processed in an indirect way, that the path back to life is an indirect, looping, strange path that happens to the side. It's not a straight line. We have a lot of descriptions of the linear site of the railway tracks, which will physically take our hero home. But in fact, the real journey, the psychological journey, is not a linear one. We have a few different hints to this throughout the novel. One of them is something we learn from Signor Unverdorben. This is a man who has supposedly traveled all over the world. One of the things that he's seen on his travels is the crocodiles of the Ganges, he says, which have a single rigid bone, according to Signor Unverdorben, that goes from the tip of the nose to the tail. They are very fierce and they run like the wind. But precisely because of this singular structure, he says about the crocodiles, they can only move forward and back like a train on a track. And so all you have to do is place yourself next to them, just a little to the side of the straight line that constitutes their length to be safe. Now, I think in this novel, we should always pay particular attention when something is compared to a train. And one of the things that is encapsulated in this description of the crocodiles, but that is also present throughout the novel, is that what happens in the sides of the linear track is crucial for survival. In Levi's journey, just as important as the straight train tracks that deliver him physically towards his destination are what takes place in the sidings, in the stations, the temporary shelters and camps, the places where the train is delayed. We also learn some lessons from the counterexamples of other travelers who become lost on their psychological journeys. We have a chapter in a book that is so focused with sleeping, waking, and dreaming. We have a chapter that is called The Dreamers. And it's in this chapter that we get some examples of those who are trapped in the dream, who are lost, if you like, in the psychological woods. One of them is a man called Trovati, who has paranoid fantasies of being followed and tricked. And he is obsessed with a trial that he had before the war. This is how it's described. His legendary trial was at the center of Trovati's cloudy memory. He relived it in every moment of the day. He spoke of nothing else, and often, in the evening after dinner, he forced us all to indulge him and perform his trial as a sort of medieval religious pageant. Now, obviously, this is one of many pageants and performances that we have during the novel, but this one is different. The other ones are once-off events, the Russian play, the other play that the so-called Romanians put on. This one is distinct because it doesn't just happen once, and it doesn't discharge energies or let off steam. It's a constant reliving every day, over and over again. It's, in fact, an encapsulation of trauma. The trauma of being persecuted, which is what drives his reliving of the trial, is something that needs to be laid aside. This is part of the necessary truce required to come to peace again. Similarly, another dreamer in this chapter is the Motto of Verona. This man, he's older than the others. He lies in permanent anger in the middle of the room. Levi writes that he almost never got off his bed. So this character represents immobility, and this is also connected to anger, to a sense, an obsession with being persecuted. A giant but undefined anger boiled without respite in his breast. An anger against everyone and everything, against the Russians and the Germans, against Italy and the Italians, against God and men, against himself. And this is an important lesson. to be learned here. That this kind of anger, this repetitive, constantly relived anger, always ends up being turned on oneself. It always ends up being immobilizing. Now, this anger, this immobilizing anger, is connected, I think, to various struggles we have throughout the novel to narrate. We have various attempts at different moments from characters who attempt to tell the story of their war. These often frustrated attempts to tell the story bring us, the reader, in and out of dreams of different kinds. For me, the most clear example is the Russian soldier who uses an indirect theatrical narration to, you might say, work through his own trauma, to help bring his mind up to speed with external facts. He recreates for everybody, they all listen to him in the camp, his slaughter of 5 sleeping German soldiers. And he uses little sticks that he places in the ground to represent these sleeping soldiers. He holds everyone wrapped with the story of how he killed them. Then all of a sudden, the story ends like this. The sailor stops, slowly straightens up. The knife falls from his hand. His chest is heaving. His gaze is spent. He looks at the ground as if amazed not to see corpses and blood. He looks around, bewildered, vacant. He notices us and gives a timid, childlike smile. Conceno, he says, it's over. And he slowly walks away. So here we have another scene of dreaming and waking. The soldier is captured in a dream of what happened, but then he wakes up. But this is a productive one. He's working through the events. Similarly, in one of the theatrical performances we get treated to in this book, the actors perform a nonsense song called The Three-Cornered Hat. This is a sort of game whereby, as the song is repeated, keywords gradually get replaced by gestures. It's supposed to be funny, it's supposed to be a comical song, and a comical side to see people having to gradually mine more and more of the keywords in the song. But Levi writes that the gradual silencing of the singers was full of what he calls symbolic and disquieting resonance, because, he says, as the silences accumulated, it seemed that life, along with voice, was vanishing from them. The novel quietly emphasizes the importance of pauses and silences and omissions of many different kinds, including this. Pauses and silences that allow what is unsaid and unthinkable to be present without becoming obsessive repetition. We might think of this whole novel, in fact, this whole truce that is narrated, as being about one of these pauses, in which huge things, griefs and confusions that are too vast to look at head on, are confronted in the margins, under the surface, to one side.